September 17, 1944. 30,000 Allied paratroopers drop into occupied Holland with one breathtaking promise: seize 3 bridges, cross the Rhine, end the war in 48 hours. Intelligence assured commanders of minimal German armor in their path. They were catastrophically wrong. 2 SS Panzer divisions were waiting. What unfolded would make Market Garden the most debated failure of the war, and it began with one man's audacious gamble. Montgomery's finger traced a line on the map, a narrow corridor stretching from Eindhoven to Arnhem. 3 bridges, each a vital artery: the Moss at Grave, the Waal at Nijmegen, and at the end, the lower Rhine at Arnhem. Capture them all, hold them, and the road to Germany would lie open. The plan was set for September 17, 1944. 30,000 airborne troops would drop behind enemy lines in broad daylight. Their mission clear and uncompromising: seize the crossings before the Germans could react. On their heels, British 30 Corps would thunder north, a column of armor and trucks stretching as far as the eye could see. Montgomery promised his commanders that the entire operation would unfold in just 48 hours. The orders were explicit: no delays, no diversions. The airborne would hold the bridges, 30 Corps would break through, and together they would cross the Rhine. Every timetable, every briefing, every map packet handed out in those tense days before the launch carried the same message: speed was everything. The bridges had to fall in sequence, each one opening the way for the next. Arnhem, the final prize, stood almost 64 miles from the starting point. The risk was enormous, but the reward, ending the war by Christmas, seemed within reach. Eisenhower's approval came with a warning about overextension, but Montgomery's confidence was unshaken. Staff officers spoke of a single-stroke thrust that would outflank Germany's defenses in one audacious move. The operation's codename, Market Garden, was written into orders, and the promise echoed through every division: 3 bridges, 48 hours, and victory within sight. The clock started ticking the moment the first parachutes opened over Holland. Inside the Allied planning rooms, the maps told one story, intelligence told another. Ultra-intercepts, decoded in shadowy backrooms, suggested German forces in the Netherlands were scattered and disorganized, their armor depleted after the retreat from France. Briefing packets handed to airborne commanders estimated only a handful of tanks near Arnhem, barely enough, they claimed, to mount a token defense. The official G2 summary, distributed on September 13th, described enemy strength as minimal, but not everyone believed the picture was so rosy. In early August, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Baltimore, a sharp-eyed American intelligence officer, filed a dissenting memo. His sources, including intercepted German orders and Dutch resistance reports, painted a different reality. Elements of the 9th SS Panzer Division and the 10th SS were refitting in the forests near Arnhem. Baltimore's warning landed on the desks at SHAEF, dated August 5th, but was quietly set aside. The Dutch resistance, risking everything, sent word through secret channels German armor was on the move. Their messages were dismissed as exaggeration, lost in the tide of optimism sweeping Allied headquarters. Aerial reconnaissance photos, grainy and ambiguous, showed columns of vehicles hidden beneath trees. Some analysts flagged the images, arguing that tanks could be concealed in the wooded approaches to Arnhem. Yet in the final intelligence summary, these doubts were buried. The staff consensus held the Germans were weak, the corridor could be punched open, and the airborne would face only scattered resistance. The last operational briefings before the drop made no mention of the dissenting voices. The gamble was conscious, and the warnings were left behind in the rush to launch. As the clock ticked toward September 17th, the seeds of surprise were already sown. Memos were ignored, photographs were overlooked, and one analyst quietly persisted, seeing what others chose not to see. Dawn at Arnhem brought no relief. Of the thousands who dropped, only 745 men made it to the bridge under John Frost's command. The rest were scattered, lost in the maze of fields, pinned down by German fire, or tangled in hedgerows far from their objective. Frost's war diary, written in cramped script, counted heads and found the numbers shrinking by the hour. The bridge itself loomed ahead, but the men who reached it were already cut off, surrounded by enemy armor and infantry that had moved faster than the planners ever imagined. Inside the battered headquarters overlooking the river, a signal operator hunched over his wireless set, tuning the dials, waiting for a reply that never came. The static was relentless. Every attempt to reach division headquarters brought only silence or the distant crackle of German voices. The official signal log for September 18th recorded a total blackout. No contact with Oosterbeek, no reply from main force. Enemy jamming suspected. Orders could not be sent. Requests for artillery or air support vanished into the ether. The paratroopers fought blind, forced to rely on shouted orders and hand signals as German opposition closed in from every side. By the second night, the perimeter around the bridge had shrunk to a handful of ruined buildings. Ammunition ran low. Frost's men, many wounded, braced for another assault without knowing if help was even on the way. The ticking clock was measured in gunfire and the dwindling number of defenders. Each hour without relief made the prospect of holding out seem more impossible. The bridge, so close, so vital, became a trap. Arnhem's defenders, cut off from the world, waited for a rescue that was already falling behind schedule. The road north from Eindhoven was little more than a raised ribbon of tarmac, hemmed in by ditches and sodden fields. Every tank, truck, and gun in XX Corps was forced onto this single artery, no room to pass, no margin for error. When the first Bailey Bridge went up at Grave, engineers logged the delay. 3 hours lost to a partial demolition, 12 tanks knocked out by mortar fire as sappers worked under shell bursts. The columns stretched for miles, headlights off, engines idling. Each halt rippled backward, turning the advance into a crawling procession of steel and nerves. On September 18th, a minefield near Groesbeek brought the convoy to a standstill. Sappers picked their way through mud and wire, clearing 27 mines by hand while officers watched the clock. 2 hours were lost. Fuel trucks idled, burning precious reserves. By the time the road reopened, only 70% of the planned fuel had reached the forward units. The War Diary of Royal Engineers recorded the numbers: 4 major bridge failures in 5 days, each one demanding a new Bailey span, each one bleeding away the hours. German artillery found its mark at Nijmegen. A shell tore through the bridge deck just as infantry prepared to cross. The engineers swung into action again, bolting steel trusses together while shells landed nearby. 4 hours later, the crossing resumed, but the schedule was already broken. On September 20th, a supply convoy was ambushed near Holland. 12 trucks were lost, their cargo of ammunition burning in the roadside ditch. The front lines felt the pinch instantly. Artillery batteries rationed shells, tank crews counted every round. By week's end, the engineers' own logs showed a 30% shortfall in supplies delivered to the Arnhem approaches. The narrow road, so bold on the map, had become a bottleneck choking the advance, every delay leaving the airborne further isolated, every lost hour closing the door on relief. At Arnhem, the last defenders gathered in shattered rooms, bandaged and exhausted, as German loudspeakers called for surrender. John Frost's final entry in the War Diary, written with a trembling hand, recorded the moment: all forces surrender at 12:15. The bridge, held for 4 days against tanks and fire, finally slipped from Allied hands. Soldiers filed out under white flags, faces hollow from hunger and loss. The cost was staggering. Of the men who landed, only a fraction would escape. Nearly 5,500 Allied personnel were killed, wounded, or captured in the Arnhem sector alone. The silence that followed was heavy with defeat. For the survivors, the price of holding the bridge was measured in empty ranks and the names missing from roll call. The promise of a swift victory had ended in captivity, the bridge now a symbol of sacrifice rather than triumph. Historians still argue over the decisions made in those tense weeks of 1944. Some point to the drop zones at Arnhem, too distant from the bridge, too exposed to German counterattack. Others ask what might have happened if the launch had been postponed, giving time for more intelligence, or shifting the plan to a phased advance. In the aftermath, the human cost extended far beyond the battlefield. Arnhem's city center, once bustling with life, became a wasteland of shattered stone and empty windows. Dutch civilians paid a heavy price. Anna van der Meulen, a young shopkeeper, wrote in her diary, "The street where my shop once stood is now a crater of broken bricks. Smoke curls from every doorway. The church bell no longer tolls, only the scream of shells. The Rhine crossing, so central to Allied hopes, would not come for another 5 months. For the people of Arnhem, the consequences of failure lingered in every ruined home and every missing neighbor." Military plans still hinge on bold promises and collide with messy reality. In every conflict, ambition can outpace what men and maps can bear. Today, the cost of overreach is measured in lives, not just lines on a map. The lesson echoes: hope alone never wins the ground.